pleasure to be here tonight and to meet some new people. We're just delighted that you're here. And what I want to do tonight is to continue our discussion about the health consequences of smoking and eating. We all eat about 2,000 calories of food every day in the United States. And one of the major problems that occurs in the United States is that an increasing percentage of our population is gaining weight. We're getting fat. The incidence of obesity in the United States is now something like 35% of the population. And the correlation between obesity and death from all 10 causes of death is striking. So the more you weigh, the less you're going to live. Now, I want to talk tonight about the differences between the standard American diet that we've been talking about. Last night we reviewed the 10 leading causes of death in the United States. I'll just mention those real quickly for those of you who aren't here. Number one is heart attacks, killing 630,000 people a year. Number two is cancer, which kills about 600,000 people a year. After that comes a series of other diseases, including high blood pressure, which causes strokes, accidents, which take about 130,000 lives a year in this country, autoimmune diseases, diseases where organs are attacked by the immune system, and the triggers for that type of disease, such as rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes, autoimmune thyroiditis, autoimmune hepatitis, a whole host of diseases. Almost any organ in the body can be attacked by the immune system and destroyed. And the leading cause for transplants in the United States is organs that have been attacked by the immune system and therefore made inoperable or unfunctional. And so if you need a liver transplant, or if you need a transplant of your kidneys, or if you need a transplant of your lungs, all of these are diseases that are caused by the autoimmune system. And that system is very much affected by what we eat. Okay, I missed 2 or 3 of the major causes of death. I didn't mention suicide, which is number 10. The other major disease that has occurred just in the last couple of decades is opiate overdose. People who kill themselves by taking a narcotic drug. And chief among the offenders in that department is a drug called fentanyl, which is a synthetic opioid, which is very lethal, extremely potent, 5 times as potent as morphine, and which can kill you in a very short time if you take an overdose of it. I have a son who's an ER physician, and he treats an overdose of opioid patients almost every day. So it's becoming a major epidemic and killing 40,000 people every year in the US. So anyway, these various causes of death, of the 10 I didn't mention, but 6 of the 10 are related to what we eat. Heart disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity, autoimmune diseases, and
Alzheimer's.
Pardon?
Alzheimer's?
And Alzheimer's disease. That's the other one. Okay. So what I want to do now is review a little bit about the difference between the standard American diet that most of us consume and what we would like to recommend as a better way to eat. Okay, this is the standard American diet. It contains about 50% of its calories as carbohydrate or sugars, It contains 15 to 20% of its calories as protein. It contains about 40% of its calories as fat. And the reason for that is that fat contains 9 calories per gram, whereas carbohydrate and protein have just 4 calories per gram. So fat is more than twice as potent as a calorie bearer than the other 2 food sources. And then I have down here in this little bitty narrow place, fiber. And fiber is that portion of the food that we eat that is not absorbed into our system, stays in the gut, and makes up the bulk of the stool. It's very important because it controls a number of health functions that we're going to talk about. Number 1, fiber controls the rate of passage through the gut. If you're on a low fiber diet, the time that it takes for food to go from your mouth to your anus is about 120 hours. Wow. 4 days. If you eat enough fiber, such as is recommended by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 35 grams of fiber per day, that time is cut down to 24 hours. So, transit time in the gut is very important because carcinogens that we all ingest in our diet, cancer causes, stay in the contact of the gut much longer if you're on a low fiber diet than if you're eating enough fiber. You follow? 24 hours versus 120 hours. So if I'm eating something that's causing cancer, that's going to stay in the contact of my gut for much longer if I'm on a low fiber intake. That's only one of the problems associated with the low fiber diet. The American diet contains less than 10 grams of fiber a day. The recommended dietary allowance for fiber by the U.S. Department of Agriculture is 35 grams a day. So most of us eat less than 1/4 of the fiber that we really need. And so what are the consequences of that? Does anybody here have any idea what the major consequences of a low fiber diet are?
No, that's not. Okay. It'll make you sick.
Pardon?
You'll get sick.
But I mean a specific disease.
Of what?
Cancer. Colon cancer.
Colon cancer, that's one of them, certainly. And the other one that is much more common than colon cancer is diverticular disease.
No.
Do you all know what diverticular disease is?
Yeah.
Diverticular disease is where little pockets form in the wall of the large bowel, the colon. And those little pockets can rupture, and when they do, then you get what we call diverticulitis, which is a serious intra-abdominal infection that can lead to death. And it is a cause of major workload for the surgeons in the United States. Diverticular disease requires surgery, thousands and thousands of cases. And that disease is entirely related to the pressure in the colon. Now, the pressure in a pipe is inversely proportional to the square of its radius. Now, what I'm saying is that if you have a small pipe, the pressure on the wall of that pipe is going to be many times higher than if it's a big pipe. Okay? According to the square of the radius of the pipe. So as the radius gets bigger, according to the square of that number, the pressure goes down. And the size of the pipe that we're talking about here is the colon, and that pipe, the size of that pipe is determined by the amount of fiber in your diet. Everybody with me? Have I left anybody? Okay.
Dr.
So,
Carl,
yes.
my grandmother always called fiber the broom that goes through.
That's exactly right. That's a good way to look at it. It is. It's the broom. It brushes out the carcinogens in the diet, and it does a lot of other things. Now, fiber is not entirely undigested. About 5% of the fiber that we eat is digested by intestinal bacteria. Bacteria love fiber, and they in turn that fiber into a number of short-chain fatty acids. acetic acid, you've all heard of that acid, propionic acid, which is a 3-carbon acid, and alpha butyric acid, which is a 4-carbon acid. And those short carbon acids are the primary fuel to feed the gut. They provide more than 80% of the calories required by the intestine for it to do its work. So, if you don't have enough fiber, you don't make enough of those short chain fatty acids, and your gut is malnourished and leads to all kinds of problems. So, fiber is extremely important as a nutrient. Even though it doesn't provide you with a lot of calories or a lot of energy, it is very important for the health of your gut. And when you're on a low fiber diet, you face all kinds of problems that you would not face if you're on 35 grams of fiber per day. Now, where do you get fiber?
Grain,
Vegetable.
sweet potatoes.
Do you get any of it from meat?
No.
Yeah.
Zero.
No?
None whatever. There is no animal product that has any fiber in it. None. So 0% fiber intake in the in the meat-eating diet. Now, everybody eats some vegetables, and so they do get a little bit of fiber, but the average intake in the American diet is less than 10 grams a day. And I said earlier that the recommended dietary allowance for fiber is what? 35 grams a day. So, we need to eat a lot more fiber than we do. And your fiber comes from 3 major food groups: whole grains, legumes, and the berry family of fruit.
Oh.
Okay? So blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, they're loaded with fiber. And they make breakfast a whole lot better than if you didn't eat them. So you need to have some berries on your cereal every morning, and remember that your cereal should be a cereal that contains at least 10 grams of fiber. So read the labels on your cereal boxes and which cereals have the highest fiber.
Oatmeal,
No,
Whole wheat, shredded wheat,
no.
oatmeal.
Quinoa.
Bran containing cereals. What's all bran? And what's fiber 1? Both of those cereals contain 13 or 14 grams of fiber per serving. Okay? So if you're getting a serving of one of those cereals and then some berries on top of it, you're getting 20 grams of fiber to start the day. And that's the key. If you don't get it at breakfast time, you're not going to get it. You won't get it any other way. I had an interesting experience when I was in graduate school at UC Davis doing my master's degree in nutrition. I had a professor there who was a nationally known, in fact, he was the editor of the American Journal of Nutrition, the most prestigious journal in nutrition in the United States. And we were going to a meeting in Los Angeles of a national meeting on nutrition. And so we were driving down I-5, and I said, Professor, I have a question I'd like for you to answer for me. Could you describe for me a diet which includes the usual American diet, including beef and lots of dairy foods and lots of eggs, the kinds of foods that UC Davis is famous for promoting? The chairman of the American Dairy Association and the American Beef Association are both on the faculty at UC Davis. So we drove along for about 50 miles, and his mind was grinding, and he finally came to the end of the road, and he said, it can't be done. It's not possible. You cannot design a diet with those foods and still get the recommended dietary allowance for fiber. And I said, do you think that's why the American diet has so little fiber in it? He said, you're right. So the point I'm making here is that a plant-based diet is the only way you can get the nutrients that your body needs. And this is the reason why. The American diet contains a large amount of fat, and that fat comes almost entirely from animal products. A very little bit comes from vegetables like avocados and peanuts and stuff like that, but as a percentage, it's less than 1 or 2% of what we eat. So this fat here is the wrong kind of fat. This is saturated fat. This is the lethal kind of fat that causes heart attacks and strokes. All right? Are you following me?
Say that again. Dr.
Wake
Carl.
this little lady up over here. She's going to sleep on me. So, again, to review, 40% of the calories in the American diet is fat, and most of it is animal fat. That's the saturated fat that causes coronary heart disease, causes strokes, and causes the high cholesterol level that is characteristic of the American population. Protein. 15 to 20% of the American diet calories come from protein. And you notice that the difference between the plant-based diet and this diet is it's 50% lower. Now, protein comes from a group of amino acids of which there are 20, and those amino acids being put together in various forms make up all of the proteins that we're made of. Muscle is made of one kind of protein, and all of the other things like the hormones, insulin, for instance, is made of amino acids. And so it's very important for us to understand that protein comes in a lot of different kinds because it depends on where the protein came from as to what its makeup of amino acids is. And we talked about the other night that Dr. Colin Campbell, who was the author of the China study that we talked about at some length, found that when he increased the protein content of his animal diets, what happened to them?
They died.
They all died. And what did they die of?
Cancer.
Cancer. And the protein that he was using was casein.
Milk.
Casein, the protein present in milk. And he was amazed at this because he was a dairy farmer. He came from Wisconsin. And when he went to Cornell University, he studied nutrition because he was going to try to make his cows healthier to produce more milk. And I don't need to tell you that the Dairy Association in the United States is one of the most powerful agencies in this country that influences everything that we eat. And so milk and milk products are high on the list of recommended foods. In fact, almost every nutritionist that you talk to will say the more protein you eat, the better. But that's not true. The protein content of the American diet is very directly related to the high incidence of cancer that we experience. It's also directly related to a number of other disease processes like the autoimmune diseases that I referred to earlier. And so a protein intake of anything more than 10% of calories is probably harmful. Now, it also depends upon the kind of protein, as I mentioned earlier. If the protein comes from a plant source, it is less harmful to your body. And Dr. Campbell's work showed that as he increased the protein from 5% to 10% to 15% to 20% of calories, and he used casein as the protein, there was a direct correlation with the incidence of cancer. He found, however, if he used a vegetable protein as the protein source, such as soy protein, He could go clear up to 20% and it didn't seem to hurt the animals. And that's now been shown dramatically in the China study. Last I described the fact that in the China study, where they studied 165 counties in that country that were located all over the country, and they compared counties that were near the seacoast in the big cities of China and the rural areas where their diet was almost entirely a plant-based diet. And he was able to show from that study that the incidence of cancer and heart disease and all of the 10 diseases, 6 of the 10 diseases that we die from in the United States were much less. So the China study is something I want to recommend to all of you to read. Colin Campbell, buy it from Amazon for $15, and it's China Study 2. And you'll really benefit from reading it. As the protein intake in your diet goes up from animal sources, the amino acid profile of those proteins are more carcinogenic. That is, they tend to be more cancer-causing. Whereas the plant proteins have a lower percentage of those amino acids that tend to cause cancer.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
And I wouldn't use a percentage. I don't think that it would be right to say, it's 20-75. Generally speaking, you can say that plant-based proteins taken together provide an excellent kind of protein. Now, it's true that animal proteins are higher quality. All animal proteins contain all of the essential amino acids. And so egg protein is at the very top of the quality list as far as proteins are concerned. And right behind it is meat and dairy protein. And so those proteins do have a very good percentage of the essential amino acids that our body requires. But they also contain some bad amino acids that don't do the good things.
Yeah, okay.
And so what we need to remember is that our body is capable of putting together proteins of various sources and making a good quality protein out of it.
Okay.
For instance, if you eat let's say you eat a breakfast cereal that contains mostly wheat. Wheat protein lacks 2 of the essential amino acids. And so you've got to have that from another source in order to get the essential amino acids that your body needs. And so if you eat a variety of plant proteins during the day, and it doesn't have to be all at the same meal, it can be in a 24-hour period, your body then can put those good essential amino acids together and make good proteins for your body. Yeah, the vitamin and mineral content of plant foods is much higher than the vitamin and mineral content. I didn't include that on the graph here to make it any more complicated than it already is. But the fact of the matter is that colored vegetables are very high in antioxidant substances that prevent aging.
Do the antioxidants also prevent cancerous?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
The way in which our body is designed to prevent cancer is we have a group of DNA molecules in our genome that are called repair DNA. And that means that they can correct a defect that has occurred in the DNA and make it normal again.
Is that what's called a free radical?
Well, a free radical is something that damages the DNA.
Okay.
So, but these repair genes are very important to prevent cancer, and they are promoted by a plant-based diet.
Okay.
Yes. Now, I wanted to talk about, I talked a little bit about the quality of fat. And the good fats you know about are the polyunsaturated fats like olive oil and the good fats, soybean oil, corn oil, all of those are polyunsaturated oils and they're the good kind. And You all have heard about a man who considers himself to be a nutritional expert here in the Coachella Valley. I won't give you his name, but he calls himself a cardiac surgeon. He used to work at Loma Linda, but he was fired from there. And he sells a product and advertises a diet that is very high in olive oil. In fact, he recommends his people drink 14 tablespoons of olive oil a day.
Wow.
He's nuts, and he has no training in nutrition, and don't listen to him. Now, I want to say just a few words about carbohydrate. Carbohydrate receives a lot of bad press, and you know there are dozens of diets out there for weight reduction that are low carbo diets. The ketogenic diet, the Atkins diet, and so on. And these diets recommend that people cut their carbohydrate intake down to about 20% of calories. Now, if you do that, it is true that you will lose weight. And those diets are very effective in causing people to lose weight. However, they do it at a cost. Because if you have that low an intake of carbohydrate, number one, you cannot get enough fiber. Impossible to get enough fiber on a low carbohydrate diet. Number two, carbohydrate is the body's preferred source of energy. Our bodies were designed to use glucose as its primary fuel. Glucose, which contains 4 calories per gram and makes up the kind of starchy material that is in most plant foods. Now, there are 2 kinds of carbohydrates. There are refined carbohydrates that are mostly made of sugar, sucrose, and then there are plant-based complex carbohydrates, which are the kind that you get in whole foods. But if the processor gets a hold of these things, then the first thing he does is remove the fiber. And so flour, instead of becoming whole grain flour, it becomes white flour, and there is no fiber in white bread. Whereas if you buy Dave's Killer Bread, you can get 6 grams of fiber per slice. The best bread on the market, by the way, and would recommend you all write that down. Dave spent 20 years in prison up in Northern California and in Oregon. And while he was in prison, he worked in the bakery. And so he got the idea that, the problem with most of the bread that is made in the United States is that it doesn't have very much fiber in it because they use white flour. And so he says, why not restore that fiber to the bread so that it now is a high fiber food? So he came out with a product, and it's now one of the largest selling breads in the United States. You can buy it at Costco, you can buy it at almost every supermarket.
Dave's Killer Bread.
Dave's Killer Bread. And like I say, 6 grams of fiber per slice. So if you're having 2 or 3 slices of bread a day, a big part of your fiber is being taken care of there. Now, the other thing about these complex carbohydrates is that they have what we call a low glycemic index. Does anybody know about the glycemic index?
Yeah.
Glycemic index refers to the rate at which the glucose enters your blood. That is the rate at which the food is digested and absorbed. And what food has the highest glycemic index of all?
Sugar.
No. Potatoes. Potatoes. Potatoes have a glycemic index that is off the chart. You absorb the glucose from potatoes within minutes. Whereas legume foods, beans, lentils, garbanzos, those have a very low glycemic index. And you can eat 1,000 calories of that source of food and your blood sugar will hardly rise at all. On the other hand, if you eat a big baked potato, your blood sugar is going to go off the chart. And that's one of the reasons that we have such a high incidence of diabetes in the United States, because we eat a lot of these high glycemic index foods, which cause a marked elevation in the blood sugar, and therefore a marked release of insulin is required. And so the kind of carbohydrate you eat is important, and the complex carbohydrate is the best kind there is. Are you all with me?
Describe a complex carbohydrate, Dr. Carl.
Okay, a complex carbohydrate would be Dave's Killer Bread.
Okay.
But there are a lot of others too. All of the legume family have complex carbohydrate.
What about yams?
Yams are good. They have an excellent carbohydrate content. Now, on the other end of the scale, pasta, very high glycemic index. So if you eat a big spaghetti meal, your blood sugar is going to go way up. And so that doesn't mean that you can't eat spaghetti, and we had some wonderful last night. But the point is, you have to remember that your glycemic index will tell you something about where your blood sugar is going to be and what your insulin requirement is going to be. And if you have a tendency to be toward diabetic or have a family history of diabetes, those are foods you want to avoid.